So Joe Biden just selected his vice presidential nominee, and it is Kamala Harris, who is somebody that I actually thought he was going to select, and I said so in a previous video. If you want to dig through the Left Alone Talking archives, it's okay, I'm sure you don't. People don't watch this channel too much. But it was pretty clear that he was going to select her because, and so I thought that this would be a good opportunity to talk about why she was selected, and also what her record has been, and then what she's likely to do in the future. And so in terms of why she's selected, I'd say there's two main reasons. One of the first is that she checks all the boxes in terms of Joe Biden announced that he was only going to select a black woman for the vice presidential nomination. He announced that a few weeks ago. Before that, it was clear he was only going to select a woman, but then the George Floyd protests happened, and the Democrats said, oh, geez, apparently, black people are pretty upset about what's been happening for the past many decades in these cities, which are run by Democrats through administrations federally that have been Democratic as much as they've been Republican. And so we really ought to give them something. And so they decided what they would do is make a list of people who support all the same policies as have been, the neoliberal consensus of the kind of corporate political establishment for the past many decades, since the 80s, and then we'll cross off all the white people, and then we'll cross off all the men, and we'll select from that list. And Kamala, being a powerful Democratic senator who's rising through the ranks and is also a black woman, was one of the top people for that list. So I have no problem with them selecting a black woman, but the real question is, why was the list composed of Kamala Harris's and Susan Rice's rather than Nina Turner's or Barbara Lee's, or actually progressive black women who would fundamentally challenge the systems which are in need of reform? The answer, I think we'll get to in a moment. So that's the first reason she was selected. The second reason I've already kind of touched upon, which is that she, is a rising star in the Democratic Party because she's well-spoken and she's articulate, and she seems like she's a fighter, and she knows how to feign outrage over certain social issues and cultural issues, and seems like she's fighting uphill against the patriarchy or against the racist patriarchy and standing up for regular people. She knows how to do that and get people to think that she's doing that while also serving the same interests as have always been running the country, and who are also who Biden was catering to, but just isn't able to do it quite as well because of his bumbling vernacular and mental slowing at the moment, as well as his pasty white old man exterior. And so she's a rebranded version of that. And so maybe we should run through her record really quickly and see what she's done. Maybe I'm just making all of this up. So first, let's talk about her record as a prosecutor, which was most of what her record is. And she was district attorney in San Francisco from 2004 until 2011. Then after that, she was California attorney general from 2011 to 2016, I think. And she hasn't done too much since then. So that's most of what her record is. So maybe we should run down and see what she's actually done, especially considering the reason she was selected is because she recognizes that in the wake of these George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, that we need systemic reform to our criminal justice system, and it should probably come from a woman of color that understands this viscerally and is able to bring it. And so I'm going to read some excerpts from this article. It's from the New York Times. It says, Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor, which is one of the things that she likes to brand herself as, because she is a good brander, if not a good prosecutor. She is a good prosecutor in terms of she's good at putting people away for things that they didn't even do or shouldn't have gone to jail for. But if that's your definition of a good prosecutor, she checks the boxes. So the first thing that she did as district attorney for San Francisco, maybe not the first thing that she probably set up her office and hired staff and stuff, but the first notable thing which she did in this article was there was a laboratory technician who was accused of intentionally sabotaging her work and stealing drugs from the lab. After a memo surfaced showing Ms. Harris's deputies knew of the technician's wrongdoing and recent conviction, but failed to alert defense lawyers, a judge condemned Ms. Harris's indifference to this systemic violation of defendants' constitutional rights. Ms. Harris contested the ruling by arguing that the judge, whose husband was a defense attorney, had spoken publicly about the importance of disclosing evidence had a conflict of interest. Ms. Harris lost, and more than 600 cases handled by the corrupt technician were dismissed. And so in Kamala's view, back in the early 2000s or mid-2000s, the possibility of 600 innocent people being convicted from some corrupt, drug-stealing technician who's responsible for dealing with the evidence related to that, concealing that misconduct is not a problem. But if a judge has a defense attorney who has some controversial, left-wing Marxist opinion that about the importance of disclosing evidence, that means they have a conflict of interest. Because if you need to disclose evidence, that's not how we do it in San Francisco under Kamala. I think that this should be alarming for people who think that the criminal justice system is in need of reform. The second thing the article talks about is that Ms. Harris also champions state legislation under which parents whose children were found to be habitually truant, meaning that they missed school in elementary school, could be prosecuted, despite concerns that it would disproportionately affect low-income people of color. I think that's true, because the poorer the neighborhood and the more problems that a child is dealing with at home, the more likely that they are to miss school. And if a single mother is trying to put food on the table and provide for a child without much wealth in the pocket and a lot of problems in the neighborhood and whatever it is, I would argue that prosecuting and jailing that mother and maybe giving them a criminal record and making them miss job interviews or work or whatever it is would only compound that. But it would help you appeal to wealthy white suburbanites who might think that the problem with black people is that they don't pull their pants up and work enough, and so she's gonna be tough on crime with them, which is why pretty much all the Democrats have been tough on crime up through the 2000s, up until just right about now it's become not vogue to do so. All right, the article goes on. It talks about how she, pushed for the death penalty after a judge ruled it unconstitutional in 2014. Also, how she declined to take a position on a proposition on a ballot initiative, which the voters end up approving, that would have reduced certain low-level felonies to misdemeanors. And that year, when she was asked by a reporter whether she would support the legalization of marijuana for recreational use, she laughed about it. And then she reversed course in 2018, 4 years later, is now a big supporter of legalizing marijuana. But when she was literally the person convicting people of that crime and had a chance to do something about it, she had a different opinion. Can you think of anything that was different about public opinion around marijuana in 2014 as opposed to 2018? I can think of something. It's what you think it is. It's that people did not support legalizing marijuana in 2014 nearly to the extent that they do now, or even in 2018. And so stuck the finger in the air, saw which way the winds were blowing. They said, don't legalize marijuana when she was in California. And she said, okay. And she locked up the people for using it. And now it's the winds are the other way, and she's changed her mind. This is a type of shape-shifting metamorphosis which Democrats love to do, and which can get you really far in a party if you're a smooth talker, and could even get you to be the vice president under an old white man. I'll read a little more. So in 2015, she opposed a bill requiring her office to investigate shootings involving officers. Because why would you want to investigate a shooting involving an officer? It's not like somebody just got shot or potentially died. You would want to know what actually happened there. Interesting. She also refused to support a statewide standards regulating the use of body-worn cameras by police officers. Again, why would you want to have a camera on a police officer so you could know what happened? No reason I could think of. For this, she incurred criticism from an array of left-leaning reformers, including Democratic state senators, the ACLU, and San Francisco's elected public defender. The activist Fenelicia Jones, who had supported Harris for years, asked how many more people need to die before she steps in. And Kamala said, 47. That was her line. She didn't say that, but that's the implication, is that not enough have died yet, so more are going to need to die before I do something. So the last thing I'll talk about is wrongful conviction cases. And I just watched a very disturbing podcast with two people from the Innocence Project talking about wrongful conviction cases, including that 30% of death row inmates in Florida were, when they took on their cases, had their convictions overturned. So they were about to execute over 30% innocent people at a minimum in Florida. And this happens all the time because if you don't have money, you can't get off bail. You can't, you have a public defender who's overworked, doesn't put up a real defense, and either you plea out and you go to jail because you feel like there's no other way, or you are convicted wrongfully, as in this case. And so consider the George Gage case, says the New York Times. An electrician with no criminal record who was charged in 1999 with sexually abusing his stepdaughter, who reported the allegations years later. The case largely hinged on the stepdaughter's testimony, and Mr. Gage was convicted. Afterwards, the judge discovered the prosecutor had unlawfully held back potentially exculpatory evidence, including medical reports indicating that the stepdaughter had been repeatedly untruthful with law enforcement. Her mother even described her as a pathological liar who lives her lies. I don't know much about the case, but that's enough to give me a reasonable doubt about his guilt. I don't know about Kamala, though. In 2015, when the case reached the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco, Ms. Harris's prosecutors defended the conviction. They pointed out that Mr. Gage, while forced to act as his own lawyer, had not properly raised the legal issues in the lower court as the law required. The appellate judges acknowledged this impediment and sent the case to mediation, a clear signal for Ms. Harris to dismiss the case. When she refused to budge, the court upheld the conviction on that technicality. And so Mr. Gage is still in prison serving a 7-year sentence. And so in all likelihood, there is an innocent man who Kamala decided to keep in prison because of some technicality. Because if you made a technical issue, you can stay in prison for the rest of your life. It doesn't really matter whether you did it or not. It's not an outlier. Okay, they go on. There's other cases like this. Yeah, I'm not going to read everything here, but that's... oh my gosh, they have a bunch of them. Okay, you know what? I'm going to read them. There's Daniel Larson was in prison on a 20-year to life sentence for the possession of a concealed weapon, even though his trial lawyer was incompetent and there was compelling evidence of his innocence. Relying on the technicality again, Ms. Harris argued that Mr. Larson failed to raise his legal argument in a timely fashion. If you don't argue if you mess up on a technicality, that's a 28-year fine, 28-year prison fine. According to Ms. Harris. This time she lost, thankfully. She also defended Johnny Baca's conviction for murder, even though the judges found a prosecutor presented false testimony at the trial. She relented only after a video of the oral arguments received national attention and embarrassed her office. This is a reoccurring theme, because when something goes wrong and, the national media is going to impact your ability to run for Senate or, change your political future, that's when she changes her mind on things, whether it's marijuana, whether it's this case. But if there is nobody shining a light on that, and there's no social pressure from the bottom, then what the self-interested, careerist, narcissistic politician named Kamala Harris and most of the Democratic Party and politicians in general, what they'll do in that case is appeal to, the law and order vote, and appeal to the powerful special interests who have an interest in maintaining the system as it runs right now, and not rocking the boat, and not doing any type of activism which would undermine the current system. And so when nobody's paying attention, she continues that to the best of her ability, and when people are paying attention, she changes her mind. This is Kamala. Kevin Cooper, a death row inmate whose trial was affected by racism and correction. He sought advanced DNA testing to prove his innocence, but Ms. Harris opposed it. After the New York Times expose on the case went viral, she reversed her position. Was that the second time that's happened? Maybe I read that already. No, that's the second one. Yeah, so again, she reverses her position when the New York Times runs an article on it. Because, that's, once public opinion starts changing, that's when her opinion changes as well. And Kamala does have a little bit of a history outside of being a prosecutor, although to be honest, she's only been in Congress a little bit, and most of her record is just tweets and vague statements and kind of personality, pats on the back from the media. But she has done a few things. One is that she supported Medicare for All when Bernie announced his bill back in, want to say 2017, maybe in 2018, and she said, I'm a supporter of this bill, and so she co-signed on it. But then I noticed when she was running for president, she's kind of not actually supporting what Medicare for All is, which is a single-payer system, and instead came up with some, like, hybrid between the current system and a single-payer system, which leaves the private health insurance companies intact, but she's still branded as single-payer because 84% of Democrats, or at least a very large percentage of Democrats, support single-payer health care. And so she wanted to be on the right side of that and wanted to have it both ways. But then she went to the Hamptons, which is the rich place where the donors go, and she started talking to the donors. It might not have been in the Hamptons, but I think it was. And she said to them, I don't really like single payer. I don't know if you noticed. I'm talking to these people over here, these dummies. I need to get them to vote for me because as many dollars as you get me, you can only vote once. And so I'm going to have to convince some of these poor people to vote for me too. So I tell them, I'm going to give you health care. But don't worry, that's from this side of the mouth, and I don't even like it. Out of this side of the mouth, I'm going to tell you, they're not getting any health care, and you don't have to worry about your taxes going up or any type of fundamental change. And unfortunately, that was leaked that she didn't actually support single payer, and she kind of had to weasel word and escape out of that. That was one thing she did. Another thing she did was she was a big fighter for the Me Too movement. When Kavanaugh is on the stand, she grills him because he's an attacker of women and a predator. And when Al Franken was being accused of certain things, she wanted him to get out of there. But when Joe Biden gets accused by Tara Reide, she has nothing to say and has had nothing to say for months, even though the allegations from Tara Reide are much more compelling and believable than the ones against Al Franken. But Al Franken wasn't about to make you vice president and then potentially, which could springboard you onto the most powerful position on the planet, and so you don't say anything about him. But Al Franken was just another Democratic senator who was kind of jostling for the same position as her, was probably going to run for president. He's somebody that you could take out, along with Kristen Gillibrand and the other female Democratic senators who are big defenders of women. But as soon as it threatens their career, have nothing to say about it. There was a bill to cut the military budget by 10%. Bernie Sanders just put it forward a couple of weeks ago. I had a video, maybe I'll put the link there if I can. She voted against that. And then the 10% of the budget, which would come out to $70 billion, that money would instead go to programs to help the homeless or to provide low-income housing to people, provide health care to people, and education. And so essentially, take money that we spend on bombs, use it on things to help people. Kamala thought that was a bad idea. Kamala also decided to make a big kerfuffle about Joe Biden not supporting busing back in like the 70s. Busing meaning that after Brown versus Board of Education and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and we had to reintegrate some places in the South and probably the North also because there was systemic segregation. And one part of that was, hey, we have all these poor people who happen to also be all the black people living in certain neighborhoods. And so they're never going to really get the same chance if they're not able to attend the same well-funded schools as white people. And a lot of the white liberals who are supportive of, these are the hashtag Black Lives Matter on Twitter liberals, they can tweet easy, or they can do the equivalent of that in 1970, which might say, I like Martin Luther King, as long as he doesn't get too rambunctious about class issues like he did in the last couple of years of his life when nobody supported him. Something people forget about King. What are you trying to send all these poor black people to my school for? Like, they're dirty, they're not, I don't want my kids with them. Joe Biden agreed, as did a lot of politicians, because that was something that was tangible, that would actually have an impact on people's lives rather than just kind of symbolic feel-good-isms that a lot of Democrats and people in general tend to support. So Kamala went after him for that, and she said, this is BS. I'm sure everybody remembers it. It was in the main debate. Why did you do that? I was one of those black girls from those schools, and I took it personally. And then she didn't win the presidency, and she stopped talking about it forever, and now she's apologizing and backpedaling, and she'll never say a bad thing about Joe Biden again because she never really cared. She never really cared, that's all there is to say about it. She is vapid, empty, the worst. Hey, I just recorded the whole video and then realized I forgot to say one thing that I think is important, which is despite how much I dislike Kamala Harris and most of the Democrats, I think she's a lot better than Mike Pence. And I still think that sleepy Joe Biden, corrupt Joe Biden, crime bill Joe Biden, bombing Joe Biden, he's a lot better than Donald Trump, so I'll be voting for both of them. And I'm not going to like it too much, but it is still a really easy decision.